morning. Let's talk about eudaimonic growth. A couple of main questions that we have, a few of them. First, how do eudaimonic values and virtues serve as thematic motives that shape the development of the narrative self? And how do families and social institutions foster and constrain that development? And perhaps most importantly, how should all this unfold? Deep integration, I think, is a term that characterizes the individual people and just about every idea in this project. So we'll start off by introducing ourselves. I'm Jack Bauer. I'm a personality and developmental psychologist. And I guess I don't need to look up there. I guess I know who I am, more or less. I study narrative identity development, particularly in eudaimonic forms. And for a psychologist, I think I have a reasonably decent background in philosophy and Eudaimonia, East and West. And I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague. I'll let her pronounce her name.
Peggy Desautel. I'm in philosophy. We're both at University of Dayton. And my particular areas of interest include virtue ethics, ethical theory, feminist ethics, philosophy of mind, cognitive science, moral psychology, and even a little bit of neuroethics.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's all right.
That's what she said. So what's so important about the narrative self? We're all familiar with this idea of a narrative self. One thing that it does is opens a window for researchers to study how people construct meaning in life and self-identity writ large, as Dan McAdams likes to say. Importantly, for this project, the narrative self is a largely moral self. The life stories position the self and others in particular stances with and against each other in terms of particular values and virtues that one way to see them in stories is through the motivational themes that link together and give meaning to the particular actions, activities, events, and people in that story. Narratives also develop over time. As we accumulate more experiences, of course, we have new things to add to our story, but we also reinterpret that story as time goes on, and we also develop the capacity to tell stories better as we get older, and there's a lot of evidence that suggests that goes on throughout the lifespan. Why eudaimonic growth? Why eudaimonia? I like eudaimonia. I think a lot of us like eudaimonia because it's multifaceted, just like the concept of personhood. The person, we've got, 18,000 words in the English language to characterize the person. McAdams comes up with a nice model of 3 umbrella categories to put them all into, more or less. And similarly, eudaimonia, every eudaimonist has his or her list of top virtues, top goods in life. And those can be found at the different levels of the person. Usually they're studied at the level of motives or more broadly characteristic adaptations. We're studying them at the level of life stories. If that's not complex enough, these things develop over time, which you have to be very careful in studying because different virtues develop within the person depending on the model that you're using for them according to different principles with different mechanisms, etc. And to not only that, but culture and the forces of evolution offer particular affordances and constraints on that development. So whether you consider that to be a mess, or as I like to think of it, a rich tapestry, this all comes together in the study of the narrative self and eudaimonic growth. All right. We're viewing eudaimonia as an umbrella term that consists of 4 umbrella terms with various candidate values and virtues that you could use that we're getting from models of eudaimonia in both psychology and philosophy, both East and West, that have gained some traction, and particularly in the current day. When we talk about wisdom here, we're meaning in a very broad term. In psychology, it's often framed as the capacity to think complexly and integratively about the self and others. Okay? So these particular, so whether you're talking about Aristotle's practical reason, or in practical wisdom, or in psychology, psychosocial maturity, or in either field, authenticity, Even mindfulness, from a Buddhist perspective, clears a space for the capacity to think a little bit deeper, more deeply, one level maybe deeper, more deeply than you had in terms of in terms of what's going on without particular defenses, blocking the way, facilitating development of wisdom. There's that. In contrast to that idea is something that isn't often considered as a value in itself in eudaimonic models, and that has to do with satisfaction. It has to do with how good we feel about the self in a world of others, okay? Eudaimonists often cringe with that, but there's a lot of room for that. Even in Aristotle, we see it. Philosopher Dan Hebron has a really nice model showing how satisfaction can be viewed in the broad level in terms of life satisfaction, but also in terms of fulfillments in particular contexts of meanings in life, or a sense of meaningfulness, as Susan Wolf talks about it. There's another category of motives and outcomes in life that don't easily fit into either of these categories, and so we're using the broad term love to talk about that. It deals with the enactment of particular passions, and these passions can be directed communally or agentically. So something like karuna in Buddhism is a major virtue for a quality of a good life. Or the idea of generativity, contributing to or care for future generations of society, even humanity. All right, that's on the more communal side. On the agentic side, we have things we love to do, things we're passionate about, not necessarily just simple passions, but meaningful passions. Things that might come out of something like Csikszentmihalyi's flow, which isn't necessarily moral, but to the degree it's directed in particular ways can be, vital engagement and whatnot. Then there's the idea of growth, which is how all these different things develop over time. This is a highly, I think, undervalued area in both philosophy and psychology in studies of eudaimonia. I think it's implicit in Aristotle's notion of arete and excellence, that we're not born with this excellence. It has to develop somehow, and yet it's not as well developed of an idea. The other three categories happen in psychosocial space. Growth is more something that happens over time. Okay, how does this all come together in the narrative self? In a book that I'm completing this year, that's the plan, is called The Transformative Self, Identity, Growth, and a Good Life Story. The transformative self is a narrative self-identity. A person who has a transformative self identifies with the idea of growth, interprets the past as meaningful in terms of growth, and plans a future for growth in these various eudaimonic ways. And so a life story that emphasizes growth has a lot of growth themes. And I'll just talk about two of them. One is an experiential growth theme, and that involves a deepened or strengthened life experience. Okay? So an example, a really short example, is this. This time away together really strengthened our marriage as my feelings for him became deeper and more caring. We're not talking about a development in wisdom or knowledge. We're talking about a felt experience deepening. Okay? These kinds of narratives we find in our research predict happiness and well-being, and in fact, prospectively predict increases in it years later. Reflective growth themes deal more with wisdom. They deal more with learning, insight, heightened conceptual understanding. So this. My wedding, I saw an imagined future, I saw an accumulated past, it all integrated into a profound order. Now, I'm hesitant to ever put a narrative example because it kind of belies the vast array of expressions of this type of growth theme, but that's one of them. It correlates and predicts prospectively wisdom, measures of psychosocial maturity, and increases in that over time. Okay. Now, all of that does not happen in a social vacuum. There is Yuri Bronfenbrenner has a nice, his ecological model is a nice way to present the study that we're going to be doing, whether we get the grant or not. The individual, well, we'll save that for a question for later. Anyway, hopefully, there's an individual who is embedded in a microsystem of family, particular activities. We're going to be focusing on individual life stories and family stories. Okay? Then there's the mesosystem, which is connections among the different systems. The exosystem deals with social institutions. All right? So we're going to be focusing on political system, religions, the educational system. And all of that rests upon a macro system of values, and particularly we're interested in cultural master narratives. Okay? So the individual participates in particular activities that are the product of social institutions resting on these values, and all these things interact over time. Oh, yay. Okay, good. And they interact over time. The Bildungsroman genre is a nice prototype of the cultural master narrative, and I'll turn it over to Peggy. Sorry.
That's all right. So we're just going to focus on cultural master narratives of a good life, on the margins of ecology, social ecology, and in particular go back first to Aristotle. So as you might recall, Aristotle has a life that basically is a male citizen's life in Aristotle that has the assumptions that there is leisure and luck tied to such things as even your friends and your wealth level and your birth. It depends on luxury, power, and cosmopolitanism, and what we want to focus on in our particular study especially is social power and political power. Who has it and who doesn't? There's always going to be an unequal distribution of that, and what are the implications? And cosmopolitanism assumes that everyone is a citizen, each getting mutual respect in the worldwide community, but realistically that is not what is happening in our world and never will happen in our world. So what we want to do is look at these critically and think about social institutions that foster or inhibit for eudaimonic growth. And in particular, we want to look at systemic or systematic oppression, gender, social economic status, and ethnicity, and what kinds of things make eudaimonic growth difficult or impossible. So for instance, we'll be drawing on work of feminist philosophers like Margaret Walker, myself, Rebecca Wisnett, and Lisa Tessman, and also on those who have studied oppression. Marilyn Fry has a nice analysis of oppression where you really have limited options, and whichever option you choose is not a good option. And also on the phenomenology of oppression by Sandra Lee Barkey, looking at what it means to be psychologically oppressed and to internalize inferiority. Then we'll also look at family master narratives. They shape life stories, as do the cultural master narratives. They're a conduit of cultural values, but contextualized for the family-specific microsystem. And they can both counter and contribute. So you may have a family that's extremely abusive and patriarchal and a terrible, terrible micro-environment in which to be raised, and much of your psychology is trying to overcome this. Or you may have a family that really is quite good at countering the master narratives and supportive and respectful. So both of these kinds of master narratives, both cultural and family, are understudied in philosophy and psychology as they impact eudaimonia. Our hope is that we will create a non-idealized and developmental approach to virtue ethics, where we assume a non-ideal culture, a non-ideal social ecology, and create norms and virtues for that ecology. We'll focus on situations of unequal power relationships, abuse of power, institutional hierarchies, and so on, and identify virtues and moral projects needed to resist oppression and abuse of power. And we'll draw on some of the kinds of books at the bottom and hopefully add our own book to go right next to those.
Thanks. Okay, yes, so we just mentioned. Great, excellent. Hypotheses and questions. Narratives predict eudaimonic outcomes. Family stories shape narratives and how they develop. We're going to be looking at concordance and discordance with individual and family narratives along particular themes. Institutions shape life stories in a very similar way we're anticipating with regard to concordance and discordance. And we're also interested in, more theoretically, the structure of eudaimonic growth, particularly in terms of non-idealized conditions. Methodology, we're drawing from a longitudinal study of character development with alumni at University of Dayton. This will allow for a 2-year standalone study. And in year 1, we'll do life story interviews, 100 participants, large age range, with an adapted life story interview focusing on particularly the development of virtues and key life memories, such as major life decisions, talking about specific conflicts in virtues, and what Susan Wolf calls virtue projects, trying to instill virtue in our lives. Year 2, family stories. We'll take 50 of those people and get 3 to 4 of their family members together ask similar kinds of questions. This, again, would take about 2 hours, and we'll also have a follow-up story, which is common protocol in this kind of research, and I'm out of time. And we're going to analyze these things quantitatively according to established protocols and qualitatively through both inductive and deductive methods. We also have an exceptional team of people that are interdisciplinary, and we have challenges, which are an important part of this. There you go. We'll just, yes, if anybody has any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
Questions? Yes, Owen.
So thanks very much. I just have one question about the very interesting model you presented with all the circles, concentric circles. I totally agree with. But I was wondering about the method for identifying the appropriate meta-narratives or master narratives in radically pluralistic societies such as our own. I take it that these master narratives are kind of normative models for being different kinds of persons, right? So we live in just radically pluralistic times. I mean, we're not homogeneous anymore so that there's one. So how do you do that?
I can talk a little bit to that, certainly thinking about patriarchal narratives. So some examples I had that I didn't have time to put in. So there is, for instance, the double bind of either you're sexually active and therefore you're not capable of being raped, or you're sexually inactive and you're frigid and need to be raped. These sorts of things are cultural master narratives of a patriarchal sort. But more specifically for what we'll probably find is good mothers stay at home and nurture their children, but good mothers also provide for their children, so that means they're outside the home. There's a no-win situation or a double bind there as well. So these are cultural master narratives that give very few options for those who are oppressed, and those are just some examples.
And then, so we're interested in what are there particular prototypes of counter-narratives to this that families particularly can provide or co-construct for the individuals and their own development in there. On top of that, so Peggy, for Eudaimonia, I'm kind of looking in the clouds at Eudaimonia and what are we possible of, and Peggy's saying, all right, let's look at the ground and the dirt and see what's actually happening. And we're trying to develop a model that incorporates these two, which is, it's among the challenges, the immense challenges of this project. As for the cultural master narratives of Eudaimonia, take the Bildungsroman genre. Okay, where it's a story of character development. Often you see in coming-of-age stories. It rests upon the typical Aristotelian luxuries of a lot of leisure and a lot of luck. And if you don't fit into, so people, if you feel that you're living according to this coming-of-age story or character development story, you're going to feel good about your life. If not, you've got to come up with a counter-narrative that is somehow grounded in your environment so that there's some, or have the fortitude of yourself and a great deal of resilience and the genetic lottery luck of being able to withstand that discord. But in any case, we're going to be looking at these from different levels. There's also ethnicity, ethnic identity, the development of ethnic identity. Moin Syed was mentioned the other day, just some great work on this. We'll be looking at a lot of these different models. So.
Can you say, excuse me, can you say more about how you're selecting the 100 or 125? Because I could see that if you cast the net widely, you'll have people with, you only have a couple with the same kind of master narratives maybe, or at least culturally. But if you narrow it down, you might have more of to look at of the same type.
Right, yeah, that's what we're gonna do. So we are currently sending out, we're recruiting participants for this currently as we speak. And so we're sending out emails to 50,000 alumni to participate in this study. And we're going to be getting, we'll have a few hundred. From there, we're going to select people, we're going to try to get as wide a range as we can in terms of socioeconomic, the socioeconomic portion of this, the poverty portion of this is the great limitation of this study, is that we're dealing with University of Dayton alumni. But in any case, we can still get some range, but particularly ethnicity and
walks of life.
Of other, various age. Age is of course huge. yeah, at various demographic.
But we'll have a high proportion. For those of you that are not aware of it, University of Dayton is a Catholic university, so we will also have a high proportion of
That's right.
Catholics, which we have certainly got master narratives for that particular group as well.
Yes, Will.
Hi, yeah, that was very interesting. Is this on?
It will be.
Okay. Can people hear me back there?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it was very interesting, and I kind of wanted to hear. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your how you see your project compared to the Situationist position, since you mention it, and because you have books. You listed a bunch of books, and you wanted to be right next to them. So I was kind of, but I don't see what you're doing as Situationist. So I thought I would like to hear a little bit more about that.
Great, go ahead.
Because that's where I've been doing a lot of my thinking, is the whole Situationist debate, starting with John Doris and moving from there. And what I want to do is take situations and make them much bigger. So when you say a situation, you could be talking about a very local, very temporal situation, or you could be talking a very cultural and extended situation. I've been doing this in a number of my pieces. I've been saying, let's think much bigger about what we mean by situation. It's still situation, and it still very much affects what you do. So I am a situationist in that sense, but I think those cultural structures and master narratives can result in certain patterns of behavior that look like virtues or vices.
Yeah, and I'll add to that that life stories are a great way to study this, because life stories are all about context. So a particular theme of a particular value or virtue is going to be brought to bear on a specific situation. We're not studying virtues as abstract things, asking people, what do you value in the abstract. We're looking for what virtues they bring to bear that they generate on their own in making meaning of the particular events and people in their life. So there's a particular context there, but the funny thing about a contextualist situationist approach is that it often misses the context, the broader context of the person, as Peggy just talked. So it's expanded in space and time, and stories can get at that.
Fascinating work. Here's a question that occurs to me. To what extent is your master narrative approach sensitive to the structural conditions that really incorporate oppressive structures in our society? So for example, think of people who work at a meat packing plant, and they've got to butcher animals in a very cruel way. And so this sort of work really prevents them from being compassionate, or it sort of, develops a tendency to insensitivity or cruelty. And so there is a structure, an oppressive structure, that prevents them from developing the virtues needed for flourishing. Are your master narratives set up to capture that kind of larger structural issue?
Yes, absolutely. That's my main interest, is how these various structures that we're in, including even academic institutions that many of us are in, what does that do to our ability to be virtuous and address injustice in those institutions, let alone a meat packing place or any other. And often I think what's been under-theorized is our workplace. Most of our days are spent at a workplace. It's a hierarchical organization. You're at the mercy of your boss. You're at the mercy of the high-level corruption usually, and more powerful and bigger the company or academic institution, the worse it is up there at the top, and the reality that you'll be retaliated against if you try to do anything, as will people you're trying to help. So I like to look at those very tangible realities of social structures and the result of trying to be virtuous within those and possibly not being able to.
And then myself focusing a little bit more on the individual level and how they're construing these kinds of things within their stories. Maybe at work, their compassion, at an ideological level might not be there, but is that person not exhibiting any kind of compassion in their life? Well, probably not. There's probably somewhere, if there are other outlets, other domains of life, and that is how you see people, you see that in people's life stories, which is nice. Yeah.
And I would assume that those life stories would be very interesting, because then they would have something about a possibly conflicted or fragmented self, the tension in terms of resolving those two narratives and those two aspects of themselves.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the exciting part. That's the, yeah.
There's a growing literature on moral distress in the workplace. You might look into that, the conflict of personal values with the workplace values and how people handle those things. Yes.
Is that in the narrative area, or is it?
They use narratives. They ask them, when have you had conflict that you disagreed with, and what happened? What'd you do? And I'm just getting familiar with it. So.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay,
Great, thanks.
Dan.
You know, I'm fascinated by your use of the ecology model, Bronfenbrenner's model. I didn't see that you were going to unpack narratives at the exosystem level. Maybe you did, maybe I missed it. But it seems to me at the exosystem level is where you're going to pick up this tension of which you speak. And how home and family and government and, you know, I think that's much closer to the individual than master narratives, actually. So I don't. So I don't know if I missed it, or whether this is a helpful suggestion or.
No, you're right on.
Well, I feel as if feminist theory and other theories tied to race and class have done some of that work for us of identifying some of those master narratives that we can draw on. I don't know that we're going to start from scratch on that, but there certainly is a lot of good literature, both on master narratives, but just on oppressives and social structures and what impact they have on our psychology.
Right. And methodologically, we ask them specific questions about life and work, life and religion, life.
All right, our time is up. Thank you very much.
Great.